Hi everyone, Kim Schofield here. Welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I am going to be talking about some brand new embossing powders from Wendy Vecchi, and I'm going to be sharing a couple of techniques using embossing powders and stencils. So you can see the two cards here that I have made. But I also am going to talk about some of the new products that have come out from Ranger. In addition to Wendy's embossing powder. So there was a release maybe about a month ago now that included new embossing powders. You can see those there. And then also brand new mini archival inks. These are the cutest things ever. I can't stand it. Look at the difference in the size. So I have to confess that I've been, with this mindset of why does anybody need these little teeny ink pads? But yeah, having them in this little tin and seeing how little space they take up. Hello, want the mini ink pads, all of them, all the archival, all the distress inks. I'm hooked. I absolutely love them. These are not necessarily Wendy's colors, by the way. These are just archival ink colors. But Wendy's colors are available in the minis as well. So here I'm just showing you the embossing powders, comparing them with the ink colors. Very true to the ink color. They really hold up really well and looked great. And the other thing that was also introduced was this Ranger Archival ink cleaning solution. So I thought, all right, I've got this stamp, and it is, I can't even tell you, it's old, and the ink's been on there forever. So trying to clean that off and using a baby wipe, and initially I thought, I don't know if it's really working. It doesn't seem like it's doing anything. So I came in with a kind of a scrubby cloth and tried again. So I think you should use this with a scrubbing pad, a stamp cleaning pad, or a very rough cloth. And you also want to wash your hands when you're done using this because it has some funky stuff on it. So you want to wash your hands. So coming in with the rough cloth here, my little rag that I have, look at that. Isn't that amazing? That ink's been on there for years. Look at that. Totally clean. Love it. You got to buy this stuff. All right, let's get into the projects. So to start, I have some matte minis, and these are from Wendy Vecchi. A whole bunch of them. She's got hearts and butterflies and stars and houses, and my gosh, I love these. These are absolutely my favorite product, I think, on the market. You can do so much with them. And they're perfect size for cards. So I've put down just a strip of tape here from my ATG gun onto a scrap piece of paper. And that's because I want to emboss all these little pieces and I don't want to try holding them. And so that is how I'm attaching them to get ready to emboss them. So I have some ink. You could color with the archival ink and, emboss, or you could just take your embossing ink and go directly onto the matte mini or your stamp, whatever you're doing, and emboss directly on top of that. So this is the Carnation Red, and I am using just a little scrap piece of paper here to hold my embossing powder. A coffee filter works better, and I think I switched to that later on in the video. And just going to heat this up and melt this. Now, it is going to melt the embossing powder where that tape is, and it is going to, the embossing powder is going to stick to where the tape is, but that's okay, not a big deal. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of layers of ink and embossing powder because it will make it really smooth, really shiny, and it'll give you that look of a, what do you call it? Like an embellishment that you made all by your little self. So this is kind of a fun way to really get this very high gloss look to your embellishment pieces, or even anything that you stamp. You could do the same thing with stamped images too, because usually that first layer of embossing powder, you have a little bit of texture to it, which is awesome, and sometimes that looks great. But I love these little hearts to be really shiny and really smooth. So I'm adding 3 layers here, and it really gets nice and melty, and these look awesome when they are completely finished and cooled. And then you're going to want to let this sit on your paper and completely cool before you try to remove anything. So here's my house and the roof to the house, and I used a very sticky tape The ATG is probably not, your best option. You might want something that's a low tack, but it's not a big deal. You can pull these off. If a little bit of paper comes off from the back of the Matte Mini, it won't matter because they're very thick and it won't ruin it at all. So just showing you how to pull those off of there. So now I have my trees and I'm going to use two different colors. I want to use the green on the top, of course, for all the leafy bits. And I'm just eyeballing that. I can wipe off any of the embossing powder from the trunks if I need to with my hand. And I got a little bit of brown on the bottom part of the trunks, but that just adds to the charm. It looks fine like that. And I did want to mention that there is another way to, if you're using archival inks and embossing, so you're stamping into, you're taking your stamp, stamping it into the archival ink and then onto your paper. You can definitely emboss that way with the archival ink, but sometimes it dries quickly. So if a way around that is to first stamp into Versamark ink and then stamp into your archival ink pad and then stamp your image. And that will help keep that image wet a little bit longer so you don't have to move quite as quickly with your embossing powder. So I know that I'm explaining that instead of showing that, and I'll do another video to show how that's done, but I just wanted to mention that as a little tip for kind of extending the drying time on your archival ink when embossing. So I am using this is some paper, Tim Holtz, it's mixed media paper. And I have some Oxide inks, and all I'm doing is adding a little bit of this ink to my paper. So working in a circular motion, this is the way you get really the best blending when you're using either the regular distress inks or the oxides. I confess I am a fan of these Oxide inks because they are so creamy and the coverage is so nice. They're delicious. I love them. So I just wanted that a little bit in the background. And I want to make sure that that is completely dry. So Oxide inks take longer to dry. I want it totally dry, and I'm still going to go over it with an embossing buddy. This is just some powdery substance to make sure nothing sticks, and I'm testing. So see how it's still, I've got embossing powder sticking. So I'm going to rub that off, put on a little bit more of that powder from the embossing buddy, test it again, perfect. Because here comes one of my first techniques using a stencil and some embossing powder. So make sure you do that with those Oxide inks. So I'm using some Scotch tape just to hold that down. And I am pressing my embossing ink pad directly through the stencil. You can see that ink on there a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and add my embossing powder. And I think this color might be called Sunflower. Forgive me, Wendy, if I don't get all the colors right. I will have a link to all of the colors that I used down in the description. So I'm going to heat that up and melt all that embossing powder. And I'm only going to do one layer on this. I kind of like in the background bits to be a little more on the rustic side, a little bit more with that texture. So not overly concerned if it's not super thick. You can see how cool that sunburst looks. And I'm going to cover up the bottom half. And I'm doing that just with some hand cut hills. You could use dies if you had dies, but I just decided this was a small piece. So just hand cut this. And I did use a piece of foam tape so that that second hill is popped up off of the first one. And then I'll just use my scissors to go ahead and cut off the excess paper. And now I've got my little hills. This is about a 4 by 3 inch piece of paper that I'm working with there on the background. So just laying out the placement of everything, seeing how it's all going to look. So with Wendy's little Matte Mini houses, there are little pieces that are doors, and then there's a little teeny tiny piece that goes on top of the roof that kind of just adds another layer. So these I am not going to emboss. I'm just going to use my archival ink and potting soil to cover those up. And that just gives me that nice contrast between the shiny and the duller image. So now, do I want to leave my house just as it is? No! I want to add some more decoration. So I'm using some of Wendy's background stamps and archival ink. You want to use Archival. It's very subtle here on the house, but you can see because it is a blue on blue. And but you can see that design there. And I'm using the Archival ink because I'm going on top of this slick surface, and you know, distress ink won't dry. So I did heat set that just a little bit. And now I am using a sentiment from the stamp set that I just showed you there, inking that up with some Versamark ink or with any kind of embossing ink powder. And I'm going to emboss that using the potting soil embossing powder, and that is a new color. And I really like the look of the sentiment in the brown, very different than stark black. And of course, now I want my heat tool to really heat up before I take it to my vellum so I don't have any warping on the vellum. And then that will emboss really quickly. So now I have a piece of Stick It. This is, I can't remember his name, who it's from. But anyway, this is a piece of sticky adhesive, and I am using that to join together the roof and my house, and also to stick down the door. And then I'll show you what I'm going to use that Stick It for in a minute. So I'm just going to use my scissors to trim out all the excess. So I'm basically going to be, you know, trimming out all that excess adhesive from around the house. And this is sticky stuff, so you want to have some good scissors that have a non-stick surface to them. And now that that's trimmed, let me show you the fun thing I'm going to do. I'm going to add a little bit of that yellow embossing powder. And of course, it's going to stick to the adhesive I have there. And it will look like now the lights are on in the house. So just removing any kind of stray embossing powder from using the tip of my scissors there, just in the crevices. But you can go ahead and heat that. And now you'll have this nice embossed windows, which is really fun. So now I have all of my pieces. I am attaching my sentiment across the top part of the sun there, just using some tape runner. And I'm going to attach that behind this little panel that I have. And then I have just a plain white note card, top folding, standard size, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I'm using some foam tape to pop that up. And then I'm going to go ahead and add my embellishments. And I am using some foam tape because remember, I did pop up that bottom hill. So I'll need some foam tape to pop that up. And then for my trees, I'm going to do one of them flat, kind of coming off the panel a little bit on the side, and then another one popped up. So I have some nice layers there. And my card is so much fun. I decided to, so here I'm just adding that little extra piece to the roof of the house. And then I also want to add one of my nice shiny little heart embellishments, and I just love the red there. And so that card is finished. And that card is finished, and we're going to go on to our next card that you can see here, doing a little bit different technique. So now I love these two colors together, Garden Patina and the fuchsia color. Oh my goodness. So I love them. They're gorgeous. So bright. And so I'm using one of Wendy's quilt stencils, and I'm going to do a very similar technique where I am applying the ink through the stencil. So I'm just going direct to the paper, pushing that embossing ink pad down through the stencil. So now this you really got to kind of push because there's some thin lines in there. And I'm going to cover this entire piece with the fuchsia color, which I love. Look at that. Isn't it gorgeous? And I am using a coffee filter this time, which is a great way to catch embossing powder, by the way. I love it. Much easier than the paper technique. And then I'm going to go ahead and heat set this. So go ahead and heat set this. And this one becomes a little bit brighter. You can see it almost looks, it gets a little more purplish hue to it when it dries. You can kind of see the difference there. Oh, I love it. Such a gorgeous color. This is a great color for floral images, but I really loved using it on the background with this. And of course it coordinates with a lot of Wendy's other colors of ink and some of her little liquid pearls too. So I'm going to let that completely dry. And again, we're going to make sure that this is completely covered using an embossing buddy or some kind of embossing tool, because I am going to emboss over this again. So all I'm doing is moving the stencil, so you can see that now I've moved the stencil to some empty squares where in this you just shift it over to the left or the right or up or down depending on the design that you want. And so this time, because I don't want to go over some of the areas that are already stamped, I really just want to add some to this. I am using a little finger dauber and I'm putting the embossing ink anywhere there's an empty square. So that little striped area, I'm going to go ahead and just use that little finger dauber to fill in those areas, and that worked great. And I decided to come back in with the yellow instead of Garden Patina, even though I really love Garden Patina. I couldn't decide between that and the yellow. I just think the combination of the yellow and the fuchsia and the Garden Patina is gorgeous. I love those colors together. So I had a few little stray bits of embossing powder, but not a big deal, really easy to clean up. I just have a completely dry brush and I'm just brushing that off. And that was really easy to clean up. And then you just want to make sure you clean your brush off really well before you put it away to make sure you don't have any of that embossing powder sticking in there. And then I will go ahead and heat set the yellow. And I love this background. The kind of that quilt background is great with inks or with So now I have two flowers stamped here from the Garden Art stamp set, and this is just stamped on that mixed media paper. And I'm going to be using my finger daubers with my Wendy Vecchi Archival inks, and I will be using that to color the flowers. I'm going to be cutting the flowers out, so it doesn't matter if I'm going outside of the lines. And this is using these finger daubers is a really quick and easy way to add color to any images. And I can come back even with the yellow if I want to blend that out a little bit into the pink. I can go back over that area again. And you could color these images using distress inks or your Copic markers or colored pencils, whatever your favorite coloring medium is. You could do that. This is a quick and easy way to add some color onto these images before they are cut out. Now, before I fussy cut them, there's no dye, so I'll fussy cut these out. I am going to add a little bit of shading using my Prismacolor watercolor pencils. Now I'm just using them as a regular pencil. I'm not adding any water here. Just using a little bit darker shade of pink and green, just to add a little bit of depth to these images so they're not so flat once they're added onto my card. Now I've set those flowers aside, cut them out, set them aside, and I created a frame, and my embossed piece is going to go behind the frame, and I just used this background stamp with the pink ink to stamp on that frame. And I cut the frame out just following the oval shape here of this stencil from Wendy Vecchi. This is a stencil and mask set, but you could cut this oval out using any kind of die that you like. Now I have attached the frame to the background just using some foam tape, and I'm going to go ahead and add my flowers, and I'm going to use some tape runner tape to add flowers. I'm going to add one flower on the inside of the frame, and then the other flower I will add some foam tape to pop up So I have some nice dimension there and layering of those flowers on my background. And I love the look of that embossed quilted area in the background there of that frame. You could die cut some images out of that too, out of that quilted area. So I'll go ahead and add that second flower on the outside of the frame. And now my card is pretty much completed. I did add a sentiment along the bottom there, and then I used some of Wendy's little liquid pearls to add these little dots all around, and they dry in a high gloss and dimensional way when everything is completely dry. And I added a few of those also to the center of the flowers. And now I'm taking some butterfly matte minis, and I'm going to go ahead and add some of this periwinkle embossing powder. And this will heat set really quickly. So it's such a small area. And I am using some non-stick tweezers so that when some of that embossing powder gets on the edges, it's really easy to just wipe off with my fingers. And so this just about completes this card. I'll add those two butterflies onto my card. And both of my cards are finished. I hope you enjoyed today's video and our look at some of the fun uses for embossing powders. I hope that you will check out Wendy's beautiful colors and her line of stamps and stencils and inks and embossing powders and matte minis, because they're the best. Thank you so much. Feel free to visit my blog for more photos. Happy crafting.